the adoption rate of Bitcoin is faster than even the internet. By 2025, over 1 billion people could be using Bitcoin, and the price could be over $100,000 per coin, or at least that's what they tell us. But is it really fair to compare Bitcoin to the internet? And even if we assume that Bitcoin does have a faster adoption rate than the internet, is there any indication that this trend will continue into the future? That's what we're talking about in today's video. Hey everyone, and welcome back. This is the Part-Time Economist, and in today's video we are talking about cryptocurrency, new technology, adoption rates, a lot of really cool stuff, but not before I tell you that this video is not financial advice. You should not make any kind of investing decisions based on what I say here today. And also, I would like to say, if you could like the video, subscribe, share it, or even leave a comment, that would really help me out. So with that being said, let's get into it. We all know that we are in a bear market in cryptocurrency. Our portfolios are down, and there's no better antidote, there's no better prescription for a bear market than the hope of brighter days ahead. And this revelation that Bitcoin is growing faster than the internet could seem to be the perfect hope we were looking for. After all, we know that basically everyone in the world uses the internet on a daily basis. And if crypto is growing faster than the internet, well then, by golly, someday soon we will all be using crypto. This increased demand will drive up the price, sending us to the moon, where we all get those Lambos that we so truly deserved. Now, I own crypto, and that's a pretty interesting thought, but it's also important to take a step back and understand whether this comparison is actually valid. So the first thing I'd like to do is share this graph that I found on Twitter. Credit where it's due. This is not my graph, but what you can see is that they have plotted several major technologies and their adoption rates in the US from 1900 to about 2005. And what you'll notice is that things that were invented in the 1900s, right, like the telephone, it took a very long time for them to see significant adoption, right? Telephone was, well, this graph starts about 1900, and we don't even get to about 50% market adoption by 1945. 45 years for half the people to adopt this technology. Now, fast forward to the internet and cell phones launching around 1990. In 15 years, we've got 60% adoption. So the rate at which technologies are adopted tends to increase with time, right? So Bitcoin obviously being invented 2008, launched 2009, it should have a quicker adoption rate. But if we actually plot the adoption rate of Bitcoin, we see that it is considerably slower than virtually any of these other technologies. So what's going on here? What gives? Well, when a new technology is launched, it's very easy for it to have a massive spike, right? Going from 0 users to 1 user, that is an infinite increase, right? Going from 1 user to 10 users, that's like 1,000% increase, right? Or 100%, something like that. It's a massive increase. If you already have 1 million users and you gain 100,000 more users, that's not a big increase in percentage terms, even though it is in the actual number of users. So that's the first thing you need to keep in mind. All these new technologies, it's easy to show rapid increases in percentage terms. Now, the key thing that I want you to understand, though, is that even if we assume that Bitcoin has this super fast adoption rate, which based on the plot I showed you doesn't appear to be the case, these adoption rates, they don't increase. The growth rate doesn't increase with time. Basically, everything we see here on this graph, it starts at a sharp rate and kind of tapers off. So even the telephone that I was telling you about, it took us 45 years to get to 50%. It took another 60 years to get up to 100%. If we look at a different example, right? Automobiles, it took us about 30 years to get to 60%. And then it took us another, let's say, 75 years to get to 85%, right? So the growth rate of every single technology that they're comparing here, it goes slower, right? It tapers off over time. Not a single thing on here has a slow rate and then kind of spikes up. I guess maybe the only ones that would kind of come close to that might be the cell phone. But even with that, again, keep in mind this graph goes to about 2005. You would see that start to taper off as well. So what's the takeaway from that? Well, number one, even if we just look at the data as it is, and I've seen Bitcoin usage in the US, some people will say it's 10%, I've seen 16%, even if I plot it, and I did the 25, or I think I'll do a 20% plot when I actually draw it on the graph. When I do a 20% plot, you can see that it's still considerably slower than these other technologies, but moreover than that, they tend to peak off. They tend to level off. So even if we're at a 20% adoption rate now, I wouldn't expect that to have a sudden pivot and just skyrocket. All of these other technologies, they tend to slow over time. So if we're going by that analogy, we've already seen the most massive increases in percentage terms, right? It could still increase. I'm not saying it's, that there's no more adoption, but all of these other technologies indicate that the most rapid increases are towards the beginning of the adoption cycle. And keep in mind, Bitcoin has been around since 2009. It's not, a new technology at this point. It's relatively new, but it's not something that was launched last year and people just haven't heard about it. And then lastly, I'd also like you to consider that there are substantial differences between Bitcoin and all of these technologies listed on the graph. Bitcoin is an intangible monetary asset, right? And I'm not saying that it's invaluable or that it's worthless. I'm saying it has a distinct use case compared to something like a stove that can literally cook you food to keep you alive, or a telephone that you can use to call your family, or a automobile that you can drive to work or drive to the store, right? Those things have very clear, tangible use cases. Bitcoin does not, right? Again, it's useful for other things, but one of these things isn't really like the other. It doesn't really fit within this comparison. So, yeah, as someone that owns cryptocurrency, of course, I like thinking that there can be this massive price appreciation, that we can have all these things, but as much as I like it, it's also important to put things in perspective and look at data. And the main takeaway from this video is that all these other technologies that people typically reference have decreasing adoption rates the longer that they've been in existence. So if you're going by that graph, and again, I'm not saying this is what you should do, I'm saying if you're using this as your point of reference, then you should likewise assume that that Bitcoin adoption rate will taper off as well. So again, just my thoughts, not by any stretch financial advice, but I don't like seeing people get carried away with just hope and wild expectations without at least putting it in perspective. So thanks for watching the video. I hope you found it useful, and I'll see you next time.